What would you do if you had everything you ever dreamed of? A penthouse overlooking the city, a portfolio that could buy a small country, and the freedom to do anything, be anywhere, at any time. For Caleb Sterling, this was his reality. But what happens when the ghost of a past you deliberately buried returns? What happens when you go looking for a memory only to be confronted by a reality so staggering it shatters the very foundation of your perfect world? This is a story about a man who thought he had it all, but learned in one shocking moment that he had nothing of value. It's a story of regret, redemption, and the shattering discovery a millionaire made when he finally went to see his 8-year-old son. The world knew Caleb Sterling as a titan. At 42, his face was a familiar fixture on the covers of business magazines. Sterling Innovations, the tech empire he had built from a garage startup, was now a global behemoth shaping the future of artificial intelligence. His life was a meticulously curated collection of successes. The penthouse in Manhattan had floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city into a glittering carpet at his feet. His suits were bespoke, his watches were worth more than most homes, and his current girlfriend Tiffany was a model 20 years his junior, a perfect, beautiful accessory for his perfect, beautiful life. Yet an insidious emptiness had begun to creep into the corners of his gilded cage. It was a feeling that surfaced in the quiet moments, after the applause from a keynote speech died down, in the sterile silence of his private jet, or in the dead of night when Tiffany's shallow breathing was the only sound in the vast dark bedroom. He had conquered the world of finance and technology, but his own inner world was a barren landscape. The catalyst, the single crack that would eventually shatter the facade, came on a Tuesday. It was his 42nd birthday. Tiffany had thrown him a lavish party at a rooftop bar, a cacophony of champagne flutes, empty laughter, and people who wanted something from him. He smiled, he networked, he played the part. But as he watched the crowd, a profound sense of dislocation washed over him. These weren't his friends. They were his contacts. This wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction. He slipped away unnoticed and walked the few blocks back to his penthouse. On his block, a family was getting out of a minivan. The father, a man in a rumpled shirt, swung a little girl into his arms while a young boy, probably 7 or 8, tugged on his other hand, babbling excitedly about a goal he'd scored in soccer. The mother watched them with a smile of such pure, unadulterated love that it physically hurt Caleb to see. In that moment, the wall he had built around his past crumbled. He wasn't thinking of Tiffany, or his company, or his net worth. He was thinking of Isabella Rossi. Her name was a ghost on his lips. She wasn't an accessory. She had been his entire world once. They had met in college. 2 ambitious kids with nothing but dreams. He was the fiery coder, she the brilliant art history student. Their love was a whirlwind of late-night study sessions, cheap pizza, and shared promises whispered in the dark of their tiny, cramped apartment. They were going to conquer the world together, but Caleb's ambition had mutated into a voracious hunger. As his first company started to take off, the promises changed. His world became about funding rounds, shareholder meetings, and ruthless expansion. Isabella's world of art, beauty, and connection seemed to shrink in his rearview mirror. The final, brutal fight was seared into his memory. She had told him she was pregnant. He remembered the look on her face, a mixture of terror and hope, and he remembered his reaction. Cold, clinical, cruel. "A baby," he'd scoffed, the words like poison. "Izzy, look at us. We are on the verge of everything. A child is a boat anchor. It will drag us down, drag me down. I can't do it. I won't." He had told her to take care of it. He hadn't asked what she wanted. He had issued a command. The look of hope in her eyes died, replaced by a horrified disbelief that soon hardened into resolve. She didn't scream or cry, as she just looked at him as if seeing a stranger for the first time. 2 weeks later, she was gone. She left a note on the kitchen counter. "You're right, Caleb. We want different worlds. I'm going to find mine. Don't look for me." He had told himself it was for the best. He buried the guilt under a mountain of work, and that work had yielded a mountain of gold. He hadn't looked for her. For 9 years, he had honored her request. He had convinced himself that she had done as he'd suggested, that the problem had been dealt with. It was easier that way. But now, standing on a cold Manhattan sidewalk, the image of that father and his son tore through his carefully constructed lies. An 8-year-old boy. His son, if he existed, would be 8. A gnawing, desperate curiosity, an ache he hadn't allowed himself to feel for nearly a decade, consumed him. Back in his penthouse, Tiffany was waiting, annoyed. "Where did you go? People were asking for you." Caleb barely heard her. He walked to his office, the city lights blurring through the window. "Tiffany," he said, his voice flat, "I need you to pack a bag and go to your place for a while." "What? Why? Is this because I got the wrong champagne?" "No," he said, turning to face her. For the first time, he saw her not as a beautiful woman, but as a symbol of the emptiness he had chosen. "It's because I have to go and find my son." The silence that followed was heavy and complete. Tiffany's jaw dropped. Before she could form a question, Caleb had already turned to his computer. He was a man who could find anyone, anything. He had resources. He hired the best private investigator in the country, a man named Robert Morrison, a discreet ex-FBI agent. "Find Isabella Rossi," Caleb instructed him over the phone, his voice tight. "She would be around 40. Last known address was our old apartment in Palo Alto 9 years ago. I need a current address. Nothing else? No contact, just an address." 3 days later, an encrypted email arrived. It contained a single address. Isabella Rossi was living in Oak Ridge, a small, forgotten town in central Pennsylvania. The kind of place people leave, not move to, a world away from Manhattan. Caleb stared at the address on his screen. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. There was no turning back. He canceled his meetings, told his board he was taking a personal leave, and ignored the dozens of frantic calls from Tiffany. He didn't take the private jet. He walked down to his garage, past the Ferraris and the Aston Martins, and climbed into a nondescript black SUV. He drove himself. He needed the long, lonely hours on the road to confront the man he had become and to prepare for the man he was about to meet, the boy who was his son. The 12-hour drive was a journey through time. As the skyscrapers of New York bled into the suburbs of New Jersey, then into the rolling hills and Rust Belt towns of Pennsylvania, Caleb felt as if he were driving backwards through his own life. The sleek, polished veneer of his present was being stripped away with every mile marker, revealing the raw, uncertain foundations of his past. The confident CEO persona dissolved, replaced by a churning sea of anxiety, guilt, and a terrifying, fragile hope. Oak Ridge was exactly as he'd pictured it, and somehow worse. It wasn't quaint or charmingly rustic. It was weary. The main street was lined with boarded-up storefronts and fading for-lease signs. The paint was peeling on the clapboard houses, and the silence seemed to speak of a town that had given up. Why would Isabella, brilliant and vibrant Isabella, choose to be here? The question gnawed at him. Had he broken her spirit so completely? He found the address on a street named Maple Avenue, a tragically optimistic name for a lane lined with cracked pavement and weary-looking duplexes. Number 24B was the top floor of a house that might have been handsome 50 years ago. Now its porch sagged, the railing was missing a spindle, and the blue paint had faded to a chalky, forgotten gray. A collection of wind chimes, their music a lonely, tinny sound in the breeze hung by the door. It was a universe away from his climate-controlled penthouse. For a full 10 minutes, he just sat in his SUV, parked across the street, the engine off. His hands, usually so steady during multi-billion-dollar negotiations, were trembling. What was he going to say? "Hi, remember me? I'm the monster who abandoned you 9 years ago. I'm rich now, and I've decided my conscience needs a little polishing, so I thought I'd drop by." Every scenario he played in his head felt grotesque. Finally, propelled by a momentum that was no longer his own, he got out of the car. His expensive leather shoes felt absurd on the broken concrete sidewalk. He walked up the rickety wooden steps, which groaned in protest under his weight. He stood before the door to 24B, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He raised a hand to knock, then let it fall. He did this twice. On the third try, he forced his knuckles to connect with the wood. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet afternoon. He heard footsteps inside, slow and measured. Then the click of a lock. The door opened a few inches, held by a brass security chain. And there she was. Time had changed Isabella, but it hadn't diminished her. Her dark, curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and fine lines crinkled around her eyes. Eyes that were just as intelligent and piercing as he remembered. She wasn't wearing a designer dress, but a simple faded t-shirt and jeans. She looked tired, he thought, with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion around her shoulders. But her spine was straight, her chin held high. Her eyes scanned him from his expensive haircut to his tailored jacket. There was no shock in her expression, no gasp of surprise, just a slow, dawning recognition that settled into a look of profound, icy contempt. "Caleb," she said. Her voice was not the warm melodic sound he remembered. It was flat, brittle. The single word hung between them like a judgment. "Isabella," he breathed, his own voice sounding foreign and thin. "Izzy, don't call me that," she cut him off, her tone sharp. "What are you doing here?" The security chain felt like a fortress wall. I had to see you. I had to know. About the baby." A bitter, humorless smile touched her lips. "The boat anchor? The problem you wanted me to take care of? It's a little late for that, don't you think? 9 years late." The shame was a physical thing, hot and suffocating. "I know. God, Isabella, I know. I was a different person. I was a fool, an arrogant, selfish fool." "Yes," she said, the single word a confirmation, not an absolution. "You were. Now why are you here? If you're looking for money, you've come to the wrong place, as you can see. If you're here to clear your conscience, you can leave. It's not for sale." Her pride, her fire, it was still there, banked but burning. It was the thing he had first fallen in love with. "It's not about money," he pleaded, his voice cracking. I need to know. Is he my son?" Isabella's gaze was unwavering, searching his face for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or the familiar glint of selfishness. He saw a flicker of conflict in her eyes, a war between her pride and something else, something deeper. "His name is Leo," she said finally, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "And yes, he's your son." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had known logically, but hearing her confirm it made it real. Leo, a son, his son. He gripped the porch railing to steady himself, his knuckles white. "Can I see him?" he asked, the words raw. "Please, Isabella, just for a minute. I need to see him." She stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. He could see the years of pain, of struggle, of lonely nights and difficult days in the tightness around her mouth. He was asking her to open a door she had sealed shut for nearly a decade to protect herself, to protect her son. "Why now, Caleb?" she asked, her voice quiet but intense. "After all this time, why inflict yourself on him now?" "Because I was wrong," he whispered, meeting her gaze. "I chose a world of things, and I just realized it's empty. It's all empty. Maybe I can't fix what I broke, but I have to see him. I have to." He saw the resolve in her eyes begin to waver. She closed them for a second, as if gathering her strength, and let out a long, weary sigh. When she opened them again, the anger was gone, replaced by a profound sadness that was almost harder to bear. "Wait here," she said, and unlatched the chain. She didn't invite him in. She just closed the door, leaving him alone on the sagging porch, his fate hanging in the balance, waiting for the door to his past to either open or be bolted shut forever. The tinny song of the wind chimes was the only sound, a mocking little melody counting down the seconds of his life. The moments Caleb stood on that porch felt longer than the entire 12-hour drive. He could hear faint movements inside the apartment, the murmur of Isabella's voice, soft and reassuring, and then another higher-pitched voice responding, a child's voice, his son's voice. The sound was both a miracle and an indictment. It was a life that had gone on entirely without him. The door opened again. Isabella stood there, her face a mask of strained neutrality, "All right," she said, her voice low. "You can come in. But Caleb, be quiet. Be calm. Just don't be you." The admonition stung, but he knew he deserved it. He nodded mutely and stepped across the threshold, moving from the bright afternoon sunlight into the dim interior of the apartment. The first shock was the place itself. His penthouse was a monument to minimalist, impersonal luxury. This apartment was the opposite. It was small, cluttered, but fiercely, defiantly alive. The air smelled of lemon-scented cleaner, old books, and something warm and savory, like chicken soup. Drawings, clearly a child's, were taped to the walls, vibrant, chaotic explosions of color. A worn-out sofa was draped with a hand-knitted afghan, and a bookshelf overflowed with well-read paperbacks and children's books. It was a home built on a foundation of struggle, but a home nonetheless. A life had been lived within these walls, a life he had no part in. "He's in the living room," Isabella said, gesturing down a short hallway. "He's reading." Caleb's heart was a frantic bird beating against his ribs. He took a hesitant step forward, his expensive shoes silent on the worn linoleum floor. He rounded the corner into the living room, a space dominated by a large sun-filled window. And that's when he saw him. His son, Leo. He was sitting on the floor, propped up by pillows, his back to a large, comfortable-looking armchair. He had a thick book open in his lap, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had Isabella's dark curly hair, but the line of his jaw, the shape of his nose, that was all Caleb. It was like looking at a photograph of himself as a boy, a ghost from a life he'd never lived. A wave of possessive, paternal love, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, surged through him. My son. But then, the world tilted on its axis. The idyllic image shattered into a million pieces. Caleb's gaze dropped from Leo's face to the rest of his body. The boy's legs were not tucked beneath him in a normal way. They were thin, unnaturally so, and encased in intricate metal and plastic braces. Beside him, leaning against the armchair, was a small silver walker. The air rushed from Caleb's lungs. He felt a wave of dizziness, a roaring in his ears. This was the shock, not the poverty, not the small apartment, but this beautiful, perfect-looking boy, his son, was disabled. All the scenarios Caleb had imagined, a tearful reunion, an angry confrontation, even a joyful introduction, evaporated. He was left standing in a void, staring at the metal braces on his son's legs. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, went blank. The boat anchor, the cruel, thoughtless words he had thrown at Isabella 9 years ago came screaming back at him. A boat anchor. He felt a bile of self-loathing rise in his throat. Leo, sensing a presence, looked up from his book. He had his mother's eyes, large, intelligent, and startlingly perceptive. He looked at Caleb, a stranger in his home, with a curious, untroubled gaze. "Hi," Leo said, his voice clear and bright. "Are you the man from the cable company? Mom said you might be coming." Caleb couldn't speak. His throat was constricted. He could only stare, his mind reeling. The boy's legs, the walker, the sheer, unfair reality of it. Isabella stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder. "No, sweetie. This is, an old friend of mine. His name is Caleb." "Oh," Leo said, his eyes flicking from Caleb to his mother and back again. He offered a small, polite smile. "It's nice to meet you, Caleb." Isabella knelt beside her son. "Leo, can you show Caleb how well you're doing with your new book?" It was a gentle deflection, a way to bridge the horrifying silence that had fallen. But Leo, with the uncanny perception of a child who has had to be more aware than most, seemed to sense the tension. He looked at Caleb's stunned, pale face. Then he did something that broke Caleb's heart completely. With a practiced, determined motion, he pushed his book aside. He reached for his walker, his small hands gripping the handles. He used his arms, his shoulders, his entire upper body in a feat of incredible effort to pull himself into a standing position. His legs, supported by the braces, trembled with the strain. He stood there, unsteady but upright, leaning heavily on the walker. He looked directly at Caleb, a hint of a challenge in his eyes. See, he said, his voice straining slightly. I can stand all by myself. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of strength. It was the proudest, most courageous thing Caleb had ever seen. And it was a direct, albeit unintentional rebuke to the man standing frozen in the doorway. This boy, this incredible, resilient child, was anything but a boat anchor. He was a lighthouse. Caleb finally found his voice, but it was a choked, ragged sound. That's amazing, Leo. You're so strong. A genuine, brilliant smile lit up Leo's face, transforming him. I know, he said simply. And in that moment, Caleb Sterling, the titan of industry, the master of the universe, felt smaller and weaker than he ever had in his entire life. The shock wasn't just seeing the braces on his son's legs. The shock was seeing the strength in his son's eyes. It was the sudden, brutal, clarifying realization that while he had been building an empire of glass and steel, Isabella had been building a human being of pure, unyielding courage. He had thought he was coming here to bestow something, his presence, his wealth, his forgiveness. Instead, he found himself in the presence of something so much greater than himself, and he was utterly, devastatingly ashamed. The weight of Leo's simple, proud statement hung in the air, heavy and profound. Caleb felt stripped bare, all his wealth and power rendered meaningless in the face of his son's daily struggle and quiet dignity. He was a stranger here, an intruder in a world of incredible fortitude he couldn't begin to comprehend. Isabella, ever attuned to her son, saw the flicker of exhaustion in him. Okay, champ, she said softly, helping Leo settle back down to his pillows on the floor. That was great. How about a snack? I think there's a pudding cup in the fridge with your name on it. Leo's eyes lit up. Chocolate? Is there any other kind? She laughed, ruffling his hair. She stood and turned to Caleb, her expression hardening again, the brief moment of maternal softness vanishing. The kitchen, she said, her voice a low command. She walked past him, expecting him to follow. He cast one last, agonized look at Leo, who was already lost in his book again, and followed her into the small, clean kitchen. She didn't offer him a seat at the small wooden table. She stood by the counter, her arms crossed, a silent sentinel guarding the fortress of her life. Well, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You've seen him. You've had your shock. Are you happy now? Is your curiosity satisfied? Isabella, Caleb began, his voice hoarse. What? What happened? A bitter laugh escaped her lips. What happened? Life happened, Caleb. The life I had to live alone because you were too busy building your empire. The life you ran away from. The braces. He trailed off, unable to form the question properly. Her eyes flashed with a 9-year-old anger, fresh as the day it was born. It's cerebral palsy, she said, the words sharp and clinical. There were complications during the birth, a lack of oxygen. It was a long, difficult labor. He was premature. She paused and her gaze bore into him, filled with a righteous fury. Things might have been different, the doctor said, with a different hospital, better neonatal care, more specialists, the kind of things a person with money can afford. But I was alone, on Medicaid, in a county hospital. They did their best. It wasn't enough. Each word was a hammer blow to Caleb's soul. He could physically feel the blood draining from his face. It wasn't just that he had abandoned them. His absence had concrete, devastating consequences. The money he had been so terrified of losing, the money he now had in obscene abundance, could have changed everything. It could have given his son a different start, an easier life. The braces on Leo's legs weren't just metal and plastic. They were a monument to his own selfish cowardice. Why didn't you call me? He whispered, the question hollow. Isabella, why didn't you ever try to find me? For him. Find you? She scoffed, her voice rising with incredulous rage. The man who called his own child a boat anchor? The man who told me to get rid of him? What was I supposed to do, Caleb? Beg? Beg the man who threw me away to throw a few scraps of his precious money at his disabled son? My pride is worth more than that. His dignity is worth more than that. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. I have scraped and I have fought for every single thing we have. I've worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I've learned how to be a physical therapist, a nurse, a dietitian. I've gone to war with insurance companies and school boards to get him what he needs. I have built a life for him, a good life, a happy life, filled with love. Something your money can't buy. We don't need anything from you." Her words were a wall, high and impenetrable. He was on the outside and he deserved to be. But something didn't add up. "Then why?" Caleb asked, his mind latching on to the one inconsistency. "Why did you let me in today? You could have slammed the door in my face. You could have told me to go to hell. You had every right, but you let me see him. Why now?" Isabella's fiery demeanor faltered. The anger in her eyes flickered, replaced by the same deep, weary sadness he'd seen on the porch. She turned away from him, staring out the small kitchen window at the cracked alleyway below. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, he saw not just the warrior, but the exhausted soldier beneath the armor. "Because I'm out of options," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The fight was gone, replaced by a raw, painful vulnerability. "Because my pride, for the first time, is not enough." She turned back to face him, and he saw that her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "There's a surgery," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A new procedure. Selective dorsal rhizotomy. It's not a cure. Nothing is a cure. But it could permanently reduce the spasticity in his legs. It could mean he could walk without the walker, maybe just with crutches, or even, someday, on his own. It could change his entire life. Less pain, more freedom." Caleb's heart seized. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through him. "Okay," he said, stepping forward. "Okay, we'll do it. I'll pay for it. Whatever it costs. The best surgeons, the best hospital in the world. It doesn't matter." "Of course you'll pay for it," she said, a trace of the old bitterness in her voice. "Writing a check is the easy part for you, isn't it? A simple transaction to wipe the slate clean." She shook her head. "The insurance company has denied it. They call it experimental. The appeal was denied last week. The window to have it done for maximum effectiveness is closing. He needs to have it within the next 6 months." This was the twist, the real reason she had opened the door. Not for herself, not for revenge or retribution. It was for Leo. Her love for her son was so immense, so powerful, that it had finally forced her to do the one thing she had sworn she would never do: face the man who had shattered her heart. "This isn't about clearing your conscience, Caleb," she said, her voice low and steady, her gaze locking onto his. "I don't care about your soul. I care about my son. You owe him this. This isn't a gift, it's a debt. An unspoken debt you have been accumulating for 9 years, with interest." Caleb stood there, the full weight of her words, of his past crashing down on him. He had come here with a vague notion of making amends, of inserting himself back into a life he'd discarded. He had expected anger, maybe tears, maybe even a demand for money. He had not expected this. He had not expected to be confronted with the precise, quantifiable cost of his abandonment, and to be handed a bill so profound it could never truly be paid off with money alone. He owed his son a chance at a different life, a chance he had stolen from him at birth. And Isabella wasn't asking him to be a father. She was telling him to pay up. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm with a newfound purpose. "Whatever it takes, I will pay this debt." Isabella just nodded, her face grim. "Good," she said, "because his first consultation with the specialist is in Philadelphia, on Friday." The days that followed were a surreal ballet of awkwardness and tension. Caleb did not return to New York. He checked into the only decent motel in Oak Ridge, a sterile beige box that felt more alien than any foreign country he'd ever visited. His world of high-stakes deals and boardroom battles was replaced by a singular focus: the consultation in Philadelphia. He did what he did best. He threw resources at the problem. He didn't just offer to pay, he took over. He called his personal physician, who got him the name of the top pediatric neurosurgeon in the country, Dr. Ann Marcus, who happened to be based at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Within an hour, using a combination of his name, a significant pre-donation, to the hospital's research wing, and sheer force of will, he had secured a consultation for Leo that Friday. He arranged for a luxury medical transport service, a spacious van equipped to handle Leo's needs comfortably, to take them to the city. He booked a suite at the Four Seasons, ensuring it was wheelchair accessible. He was in his element, the efficient, powerful problem solver. Isabella watched all of this with a mixture of resentment and grudging acceptance. She hated the ease with which his money smoothed away obstacles that had been insurmountable mountains for her. Every phone call he made, every arrangement he finalized, was a fresh reminder of the world of privilege she and Leo had been locked out of. "You don't have to do all this," she said stiffly, as he explained the travel arrangements. "I can drive us. We can stay with my cousin." "Is your cousin's apartment fully accessible? Is your car comfortable for him for a 3-hour drive?" "Isabella, let me do this. This is the easy part. It's just logistics," he said, the words sounding hollow even to him. The phone in his pocket buzzed incessantly. It was a constant stream of texts and calls from Tiffany, from his office, from Marcus, his business partner. He ignored most of them. Tiffany's messages devolved from confused, "Where are you?" to angry, "You can't just disappear. People are talking," to pleading, "Caleb, please, just come home." He finally sent her a short, brutal text. "I can't. We're done, Tiffany. I'm sorry." He felt a pang of guilt, not for the breakup, but for the callous way he did it. He was still that man, in some ways, the man who cut things off cleanly to avoid the mess. His conversation with Marcus was different. "A son? An 8-year-old son?" Marcus had exclaimed over the phone. "Caleb, what the hell?" "It's complicated, Marcus." "No, complicated is when a merger goes south. This is a Shakespearean drama. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fix it," Caleb said. "You can't fix a child, Caleb. You can't acquire him like a startup. Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" The question lingered long after the call ended. The most difficult part of those first few days was his interaction with Leo. He tried to connect with the boy, but his attempts were clumsy and misguided. On the second day, a courier delivered a mountain of boxes to the small apartment. The latest gaming console, a high-tech drone, a virtual reality headset, every expensive toy a boy could dream of. Leo looked at the pile of gifts with wide, confused eyes. He politely thanked Caleb, but then turned his attention back to the worn copy of The Hobbit he was reading. He couldn't operate the drone from his chair. The VR headset made him dizzy, and the video game controller was difficult for him to manipulate with the fine motor control issues in his hands. Isabella found Caleb standing awkwardly in the living room, surrounded by his failed attempt to buy affection. "This isn't what he needs," she said, her voice quiet but not unkind. "He can't use most of this." "I didn't know," Caleb mumbled, feeling like a fool. "Of course you didn't," she said. "You've been here for 2 days. I've been here for 3,285. You want to know what he likes? Sit down, on the floor. Ask him about Middle-earth. Ask him what Gandalf's primary motivation is. His mind, Caleb. That's where he lives. That's where he flies." Humbled, Caleb did exactly that. He sat on the floor, his expensive suit trousers bunching uncomfortably, and asked, "So, who's this Gandalf guy?" Leo's face lit up. For the next hour, he spoke with incredible passion and intelligence about wizards and elves, about courage and friendship, about the fight between good and evil. Caleb listened, truly listened, for the first time. He wasn't the CEO or the millionaire. He was just a man on a floor, listening to his son, mesmerized by the brilliance of his mind. He was seeing beyond the braces and the walker and seeing Leo. And he felt a flicker of a bond, fragile and new, begin to form. The trip to Philadelphia was a turning point. In the spacious medical van, Leo was comfortable and excited, looking out the window at the passing landscape. Isabella sat stiffly, a buffer between father and son. But during the long drive, the silence began to thaw. Leo asked Caleb about New York, about the tall buildings. Caleb, instead of talking about his penthouse or his company, found himself describing Central Park, the dinosaur exhibit at the Museum of Natural History. Places a boy might want to see. At the hospital, Caleb's power was once again on display. They were whisked past the waiting rooms into a private consultation suite. Dr. Marcus was a warm, no-nonsense woman who spoke directly to Leo, explaining everything in terms he could understand. She examined him, reviewed his MRIs, and watched him walk with his walker. Caleb and Isabella stood together, watching the examination. For the first time, they weren't adversaries. They were just two parents, united in their hope and fear for their child. After the examination, Dr. Marcus sat them down. "Leo is an excellent candidate for the surgery," she said, her expression optimistic. "His muscle tone, his cognitive function, his motivation, it's all there. The procedure involves locating and clipping the sensory nerve rootlets in the spinal cord that are sending abnormal signals to his leg muscles. It will permanently reduce the spasticity. It's a major surgery, and the recovery involves months, even years, of intensive physical therapy. It will be the hardest work he has ever done." She turned to Leo. "You'd have to be a real superhero to get through it." "I can do it," Leo said immediately, his chin set with determination. Dr. Marcus smiled. "I believe you can." She then turned to Caleb and Isabella. "We can schedule it as soon as next month." The news was a wave of relief so profound it almost made Caleb dizzy. He looked at Isabella and saw the tears welling in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming hope. Without thinking, he reached out and placed his hand over hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. She didn't pull away. For a fleeting second, they were a team. On the drive back from Philadelphia, the atmosphere had changed. The tension had eased, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Leo, exhausted but happy, fell asleep, his head leaning against his mother's shoulder. Caleb looked at them in the rear-view mirror. Isabella was stroking her son's hair, her face soft with love. He saw the woman he had first fallen for, the woman of strength and compassion he had so carelessly thrown away. The road to redemption was not about writing a check. It was this. It was sitting in a car, driving his son home. It was about showing up. He had paid the first installment on his debt, but he knew with absolute certainty that the real payment was just beginning. It would be a payment made not in dollars, but in time, in presence, and in a love he would have to work every single day to earn. The month leading up to the surgery was a period of profound transformation for Caleb. He made a decision that shocked his board, his business partner, and what was left of his social circle. He didn't just stay in Pennsylvania, he moved there. He rented a large modern house in a newer development just outside Oak Ridge. It was a far cry from his Manhattan penthouse, but it was spacious, comfortable, and most importantly, fully accessible. He told Isabella his reasoning was practical. "The recovery will be intense," he'd said, avoiding her gaze. "You'll need more space, a proper therapy room, a yard he can eventually use. The motel is no place for me, and your apartment, it's not practical for what's coming." Isabella was deeply suspicious. "You can't just buy your way into our lives, Caleb. A house doesn't change anything." "I know," he'd replied, his voice sincere. "This isn't for me. It's for him. Think of it as a pre-op and recovery facility. You and Leo will be my guests. No strings attached. When he's better, if you want to leave, you leave." After a week of stubborn refusal, the sheer logic of his offer wore her down. Her small apartment was on the second floor. Carrying a post-operative child up and down those stairs would be impossible. Reluctantly, she agreed. Moving them in was an exercise in contrast. Isabella's life fit into a handful of cardboard boxes filled with worn books, mismatched dishes, and Leo's treasured drawings. Caleb's new house was furnished in a day by an interior design firm, all clean lines and muted colors, beautiful but sterile. The first thing Isabella did was take Leo's vibrant, colorful drawings and tape them all over the pristine, beige walls of the living room. For the first time, the house felt like it could become a home. Caleb began a new routine. He worked remotely for a few hours in the morning, his calls to Marcus now focused on delegating his responsibilities. "Keep the ship sailing, Marcus," he'd say. "I have something more important here." The rest of his day was devoted to Leo. He learned. He set aside his pride and became a student. He learned the complex routine of stretching exercises Isabella did with Leo every morning and evening to combat the stiffness in his muscles. At first, his hands were clumsy and uncertain, and Leo would wince. "Gently, Caleb," Isabella would instruct, her voice patient but firm. "You can't force it. You have to listen to his body. He learned to cook meals that were low in inflammation and high in nutrients, following the diet Isabella had meticulously researched. He, a man used to Michelin star chefs, found himself poring over recipes for turkey meatballs and sweet potato mash, finding a quiet satisfaction in nourishing his son. Most importantly, he learned to play. He discovered that Leo was a master strategist at chess, his mind always 3 moves ahead. Caleb, a man who prided himself on his strategic thinking, was beaten soundly and repeatedly. He took the losses with a grin, amazed by his son's intellect. They built entire worlds out of Legos on a large table, creating intricate castles and spaceships. In these moments, the walker and the braces faded into the background. They were just a father and a son, lost in a world of imagination. The awkwardness between him and Isabella slowly began to soften, replaced by a fragile truce. They were co-parents, partners in a shared, vital mission. They fell into a comfortable rhythm of shared chores and responsibilities. He would see her late at night, long after Leo was asleep, poring over medical journals about the surgery, her face etched with worry. He'd make her a cup of tea, and they would sit in the quiet kitchen, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the silence. He learned her story, the one she had never told him. He learned about the lonely terror of the premature birth, the cold fear of the diagnosis. He learned about the condescending doctors who dismissed her questions and the bureaucratic nightmares she fought to get Leo into a good school. He learned about the Christmases she'd made magical with $20 and a string of lights, and the birthdays celebrated with a homemade cake because a store-bought one was a luxury. His guilt was a constant companion, a dull ache in his chest. One evening, as they sat in the quiet living room, he finally said what had been weighing on him for weeks. "I'm so sorry, Izzy," he whispered, using her old nickname for the first time without being corrected. "For everything. For being a coward. For not being there." She looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I know you are, Caleb," she said softly. "But sorry doesn't change the past. All we can do is focus on his future." She didn't offer absolution, and he knew he didn't deserve it. But her words weren't filled with anger anymore. They were filled with a pragmatic resolve he found himself deeply admiring. The day before the surgery, a package arrived. It wasn't an expensive toy. Caleb had commissioned a master bookbinder to create a single, beautiful, leather-bound volume. The cover was embossed with a golden tree, and the title read, "The Adventures of Leo the Lionheart." Inside, the pages were blank. He gave it to Leo that evening. "This is for you," he said. "It's a book about your next big adventure. You're the hero, and after your surgery, every day, you can write or draw one thing you did, one step you took, one challenge you beat, and we'll fill this book together." Leo ran his small hands over the smooth leather, his eyes shining. He looked up at Caleb, and for the first time his gaze wasn't just curious or friendly. It was filled with genuine affection. "For me and you?" he asked. "For me and you," Caleb confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "And your mom, of course. We're a team." Leo beamed, a brilliant, beautiful smile. He wrapped his arms around Caleb's neck and gave him a hug, a tight, fierce embrace. It was the first time his son had initiated physical affection. Caleb held him, closing his eyes, breathing in the simple scent of his child. In that moment, surrounded by the sterile perfection of a house he had rented, holding the son he had abandoned, Caleb Sterling finally felt rich. This connection, this fragile, hard-won bond, was worth more than his entire empire. He was terrified of the surgery, but he was no longer just paying a debt. He was fighting for his son's future, a future he was now, finally, a part of. The day of the surgery arrived under a cold, gray sky, mirroring the anxiety that had settled over the house. The drive to Philadelphia was a silent one, the unspoken fears of the 3 passengers filling the car. Leo, usually a fountain of questions and stories, was quiet, clutching the blank, leather-bound book Caleb had given him as if it were a shield. In the sterile confines of the pre-op room, the gravity of the day became crushingly real. Leo looked impossibly small in the oversized hospital bed. When the anesthesiologist spoke of a long nap, the boy's composure finally crumbled. His eyes, wide with fear, found his mother's. "Mommy, will it hurt?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Isabella's own strength, a fortress for 9 years, began to fail her. Tears welled as she took his small hand. "They'll make sure it doesn't, sweetie. And when you wake up, we'll be right here." She shot a look at Caleb, a desperate plea for reinforcement. Caleb moved instantly, kneeling beside the bed to meet his son's gaze. "Hey, champion," he said, his voice low and steady. "Remember what Dr. Marcus said? This is a job for a superhero. This is your moment to be Leo the Lionheart. And when you wake up, the scary part is over, and our real adventure begins. We have a whole book to fill, remember?" Leo's fearful eyes shifted from his mother to his father. He saw not a newcomer, but an anchor. He gave a small, determined nod. "Okay," he whispered, "Leo the Lionheart." The moment the transport team wheeled him away, Isabella's resolve shattered. A sob broke from her, and she leaned against the wall, her body shaking. Without a word, Caleb wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly as the weight of 9 years of solitary fear poured out. In that sterile corridor, all pretense fell away. They were not a millionaire and his bitter ex-wife. They were simply parents, united in terror and hope, clinging to each other for strength. The 6 hours of the surgery were an eternity spent in the purgatory of the waiting room. They barely spoke, existing in a shared bubble of agonizing suspense. Caleb, a man who had mastered control, felt utterly powerless. He found himself praying, bargaining with the universe, willing to trade his entire fortune for the safety of the boy he had only just begun to know. When Dr. Marcus finally appeared, her face tired but lit by a warm smile, the world started turning again. "He's in recovery," she announced, the words like a benediction. The surgery was a complete success. "He's a rock star." Relief washed over them, so potent it was dizzying. Tears streamed down Isabella's face, but this time they were tears of joy. The first and most difficult battle had been won. The recovery was a new kind of war, fought not in an operating room, but in the therapy room of their rented house. The months that followed were a grueling marathon of pain, frustration, and relentless physical therapy. There were days Leo cried, his small body pushed to its limits, but Caleb was there for every moment. He transformed from a distant financier into a hands-on coach, cheerleader, and father. He turned agonizing stretches into wrestling matches with a tickle monster and transformed repetitive leg lifts into a superhero training academy. He and Isabella worked as a seamless team, a well-oiled machine fueled by love and coffee, their shared goal eclipsing any past grievance. The true breakthrough came 3 months after the surgery. Leo stood between the parallel bars in the therapy room, his face a mask of concentration. Urged on by his parents, he slowly, deliberately lifted his hands from the bars. For 1 second, then 2, then 3, he wobbled, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and triumph. He was standing, on his own 2 feet, with no walker, no braces, no support. Isabella's gasp was audible, her hands flying to her mouth. Caleb, filming on his phone, let out a triumphant shout that was half laugh, half sob. That night, Leo made the first entry in his book. He drew a shaky but proud stick figure of himself standing tall. Beneath it, Caleb helped him write the 3 most beautiful words he had ever seen. "Today I stood." A year later, the world was different. The rented house was now truly a home, filled with the sounds of life and laughter. In the sun-drenched backyard, Caleb and Isabella stood together, watching the source of that laughter. Leo, using only a single light crutch more for confidence than necessity, was chasing a soccer ball across the grass. He was clumsy, he was unsteady, but he was running. He was free. Isabella leaned her head lightly on Caleb's shoulder. The anger and bitterness between them had long since been replaced by a deep, quiet respect and a powerful partnership. They were not lovers, but they were family in the truest sense of the word. Caleb watched his son, his heart full. He had come to Oak Ridge seeking to pay a debt, to quiet a nagging ghost in his conscience. He had thought power was in a boardroom and wealth was a number on a screen. But he had been wrong. The shock of seeing his son, not just his disability, but his incredible spirit, had shattered that illusion. Power was holding your child's hand through a night of pain. Wealth was the sound of your son's laughter. He had found his son, and in the process, he had finally saved himself. The story of Caleb and Leo isn't just about a millionaire's shocking discovery. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest regrets often stem from the choices we make when we value things over people. Caleb Sterling had to lose everything he thought he wanted to gain the one thing he truly needed: a family. His journey shows us that true wealth isn't measured by a bank account, but by the richness of our connections, by our capacity for love, and by our courage to face our past and build a better future. It teaches us that second chances are possible, but they aren't given freely. They must be earned through humility, presence, and unwavering commitment. If this story of redemption, love, and the true meaning of family resonated with you, please take a moment to show your support. Hit that like button to let us know it moved you, share this video with someone who might need to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. Thank you for listening.